In the violent world of modern crime, an invisible watermark on a piece of paper can be far more lethal than a loaded gun. And what I am about to tell you is so unbelievable, so completely insane, that if I had not verified every single detail myself, I would have thought it was fiction. It was a cold evening in November of 2023, and a thick, suffocating fog was blanketing the city of Milan like a funeral shroud. Inside an exclusive lounge that most people will never even know exists, Leopoldo Fiorentini, the undisputed leader of the city's most formidable and feared criminal organization, was just moments from making the most catastrophic error of his entire life. His pen hovered over a signature line that would transfer $250 million for a technology bank that was a complete ghost. It did not exist. Not a single client. Not a single real transaction. It was the most elaborate financial trap ever constructed in modern European history. The world's top law enforcement agency, Interpol, had seen nothing suspicious. His own highly paid team of lawyers, men who charged €1,000 an hour, had examined the deal and found no flaws. 3 independent auditing firms had given it a clean bill of health. Every safeguard, every system, every expert had been completely fooled. The one person who would ultimately save the most feared man in all of northern Italy was a 24-year-old waitress who was earning €9 an hour. Her name was LOL Breeze, and her only intention that evening was to place his double espresso on the table without spilling it. How could one woman, a woman in a simple black uniform carrying a coffee tray, see what an entire system of brilliant professionals missed? Stay with me to find out, because the answer to that question will change the way you think about power, intelligence, and survival forever. She moved closer to the table, her eyes instinctively drawn to the document. In a single sweeping glance that her father had drilled into her from the time she was a small child, a glance that lasted no more than 2 seconds, she saw the fatal flaw. The one microscopic detail that 3 auditing firms, a team of corporate lawyers, and the most powerful crime boss in Italy had all completely overlooked. Leaning in, she uttered just 6 quiet words. Her accent was so perfectly aristocratic that it could only have come from one of Rome's most ancient and powerful families. A sound completely at odds with her simple uniform and the coffee cup trembling slightly in her hand. Those few words did more than just stop a financial disaster of epic proportions. They launched a brutal and relentless hunt for the truth that would leave bodies, broken alliances, and billions of dollars scattered in its wake. This is the incredible story of an accountant's daughter, a young woman whose only inheritance from her father was a death sentence and a pair of eyes that could see the invisible. But before we get into the details of her story, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been the only one to notice a small detail that everyone else overlooked? That one tiny inconsistency that suddenly changed the entire picture. If you are already captivated by LOL's extraordinary ability, please take a moment to support the channel and hit that subscribe button. I would also love for you to leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from today. It is amazing to see our community connect from Milan to New York and every corner of the world in between. Together, let us investigate how a young woman's dangerous inheritance became both the curse that haunted her and the very thing that offered her salvation. This story carries a powerful truth. Sometimes the very thing that puts you in danger is the same gift that sets you free. It is a reminder that your greatest strength is never the one the world expects you to have, and that true justice does not come from power alone, but from the courage to use what you know when it matters most. Now, it is time for us to enter the lion's den. To truly appreciate how perilously close Leopoldo Fiorentini came to complete and utter ruin, you must first understand the environment where this all took place. Because the setting of this story is just as terrifying as the story itself. This was not some clandestine meeting in a smoke-filled room in the back of a restaurant. The deal was happening at the Gilded Cage. This was an elite, invitation-only establishment located in Milan's exclusive Quadrilatero district, the most expensive square mile of real estate in all of Italy. The price of a membership here was more than what the average person earns in their entire life, and there was a 3-year waiting list just to be considered. The walls were lined with original Renaissance paintings that museums had been trying to acquire for decades. The date was November 17th. Outside, a dense fog was drifting in from the Navigli canals, creating a shroud of gray over the city that made the buildings look like the ghosts of a forgotten civilization. Inside, however, the atmosphere was perfectly controlled, maintained at a constant and precise 20 degrees Celsius. The air smelled of aged Cuban cigars and ambition. Leopoldo Fiorentini was seated in the club's most private and secure area. They called it the Venetian Corner. It was a secluded booth that had been designed with strategic, military-level precision. The table was positioned so that it was impossible to photograph from any angle. A white noise generator embedded in the wall ensured that no conversation could ever be recorded. From this single vantage point, a person could observe every entrance, every exit, and every conceivable weakness in the room. Leopoldo himself defies the common stereotype of a mafia boss. He is not a man who raises his voice or makes loud, overt threats. He has never been seen in public losing his temper. His power is quiet and absolute, the kind that does not need to announce itself because everyone already knows it is there. He dresses exclusively in Brioni suits, each one custom-tailored in Rome at a cost of 15,000 euros each. He possesses 2 advanced degrees, one in economics and the other in international law, from the prestigious Bocconi University, where he graduated with the highest honors in his class. He is the head of Fentini Holdings, a vast multinational corporation that operates as a legitimate investment firm during the day. At night, it becomes the instrument he uses to manage and expand his family's sprawling criminal empire, an empire that stretches across 14 countries and generates an estimated 600 million euros in annual revenue. At 38 years old, he is intensely analytical, ruthlessly disciplined, and dangerously intelligent. He speaks 5 languages fluently and has been known to read an entire corporate financial report during a single transatlantic flight and identify discrepancies that entire accounting departments had missed. The man seated opposite him was named Adriano Marchetti. In the exclusive circles of high-stakes finance, Marchetti was a ghost, a broker who materialized only for the wealthiest clients and then vanished the moment the ink was dry. He specialized in arranging acquisitions for emerging tech companies that needed discreet investors. He also assisted old money dynasties in quietly liquidating their assets, far from the prying eyes of government regulators. Marchetti presented a flawless image, with distinguished silver hair at his temples and a tan that suggested winters spent in Monaco. He projected an aura of unshakable confidence, the kind that only comes from a long career of never, ever losing a deal. But here is what Leopoldo did not know. Here is the detail that would have changed everything. Marchetti had been dead for 3 years. The real Adriano Marchetti had suffered a fatal heart attack in a hotel room in Geneva. The man sitting across from Leopoldo was using a stolen identity so perfectly constructed that not even Interpol's facial recognition database could distinguish him from the original. "The acquisition is absolutely pristine, Mr. Fiorentini." Marchetti's voice was smooth as he pushed a rich, burgundy leather portfolio across the polished marble tabletop. He continued, outlining the details with the rehearsed precision of a man who had delivered this exact pitch dozens of times before to dozens of other victims. Ventura Tech Bank was established in 2015, with its official headquarters located in Lugano. It has met all regulatory compliance standards. The bank possesses a state-of-the-art digital banking infrastructure that currently serves over 300,000 individual clients. The total purchase price is $250 million. We will execute a full liquidity transfer the moment you provide your signature. Leopoldo made no move to take the documents. Instead, he calmly took a small, deliberate sip of his drink, a 30-year-old single malt scotch that cost 400 euros per glass. He had been searching for a secure method to absorb a massive wave of international profits. He needed to do this before the European Banking Authority began its scheduled deep audit of his global shipping companies in exactly 47 days. The clock was ticking. The pressure was immense. And in that pressure, even the most brilliant minds make mistakes. LOL Breeze had learned how to analyze complex financial reports long before she ever learned how to read a children's book. When other kids her age in Rome were struggling to memorize their multiplication tables, she was perched on her father's lap. They would sit together in his study, a cozy room near the historic Pantheon, surrounded by towers of financial documents that reached almost to the ceiling. There, she would watch him intently as he used an expensive fountain pen, a Mont Blanc Meisterstück that cost more than their rent for 3 months, to circle tiny errors in the pension fund statements of the Vatican itself. Her father, a man named Giacomo Breeze, was not an official employee of the church. His name appeared on no payroll, no directory, no organizational chart. His real work was for the powerful figures who relied on him to make the church's money vanish from one place and reappear in others, often in jurisdictions with more favorable laws. He was what insiders called a financial ghost whisperer, a man who could make billions move silently through the global banking system without leaving a single trace. "Find the ghost, LOL," he would say in a soft whisper, pushing a complex balance sheet across the surface of his polished mahogany desk. She was only 7 years old at the time. Her small legs would dangle high above the floor from the oversized leather chair. She would have to squint to focus on the long columns of numbers that seemed to blend together like streaks of rain running down a window pane. "Every lie always leaves a shadow behind it," he taught her. "The numbers will always confess the secrets that men try to hide. Remember that, LOL, numbers cannot lie. Cannot. Only the people who write them can." Giacomo possessed a rare and brilliant mind, the kind that appears perhaps once in a generation. He had an almost supernatural talent for finding hidden patterns within chaos. He could spot the microscopic flaws that were the only things separating a legal transaction from a brilliantly conceived fraud. He could look at the paperwork for a corporate takeover and immediately identify the phantom shell company, even if it was buried 6 layers deep in the documents. He could study a simple wire transfer confirmation and know, just from the routing codes, that the funds had been illegally bounced between 3 different continents in less than 90 seconds. His mind worked like a supercomputer, but with the intuition of an artist. The wealthy elite of Roman society paid him immense sums of money for his unique skills. They hired him to uncover the secrets of their rivals and to conceal their own. Cardinals, politicians, industrialists, and crime lords all sought his services. He was untouchable, protected by the sheer volume of secrets he carried. Or so he believed. But Giacomo made a single fatal error in judgment. He discovered a massive sum of money that was never meant to be seen by anyone outside of a very small and very dangerous circle. It was a 40 million euro slush fund, skillfully concealed within a public reconstruction contract for earthquake relief. This money belonged to ruthless men, men for whom murder was just a routine part of doing business, as unremarkable as signing a check. Just 3 weeks after Giacomo delivered his final damning report to his client, he was discovered dead in his office. The expensive fountain pen was still clutched in his hand. The official police report ran to just 2 pages. The coroner spent less than 30 minutes on the examination. The ruling was suicide. Case closed within 72 hours. But LOL was only 16 years old when it happened, and she knew instantly, with a certainty that burned in her chest like fire, that it was not a suicide. Her father had trained her to see the details that other people ignored, and the scene of his death was filled with inconsistencies that screamed murder to anyone with the eyes to see them. She noticed the unnatural pattern of the ink splatter on the desk, drops that had fallen at angles that were physically impossible if he had been sitting in his chair. She saw the impossible angle of the wound, an angle that no medical examiner with any integrity could have overlooked. Most importantly, she knew that her father had been left-handed his entire life. He had written every report, signed every document, and circled every error with his left hand for as long as she had been alive. Yet the pen had been placed in his right hand. It was a detail so obvious, so glaring, that its very presence told her something even more terrifying. The killers did not care if anyone noticed. They were sending a message. They were untouchable, and they wanted the world to know it. However, knowing the truth and being able to survive that truth were two entirely separate challenges. And so, LOL Breeze vanished. In a single night, she destroyed her applications to the university where she had already been accepted on a full scholarship. She burned all of her father's sensitive files in the fireplace of his study, watching years of dangerous knowledge turn to ash. And she carefully constructed a new identity for herself as someone completely invisible, someone who would never again attract the attention of powerful men. She became a simple waitress, a person so unremarkable that she would be forgotten the moment she walked away. She was the kind of woman that powerful men tend to look right through, not at. She fled to Milan, legally changed her last name, and made a solemn promise to herself, standing alone in a tiny apartment that smelled of mold and broken dreams, that she would never again use the dangerous gift her father had passed down to her. She kept that promise for 8 long, agonizing years, right up until the cold November evening when she saw Leopoldo Fiorentini reach for the pen that was about to sign away his entire fortune. And in that moment, something inside her broke. Or perhaps, something inside her finally woke up. The black Mercedes sedan did not take her to a dark canal to be disposed of. That was the first thing that surprised LOL. Instead, the car delivered her to a large, converted warehouse located in the Porta Romana district. It was the type of building that was designed to look completely deserted and derelict from the outside, the kind of place you would walk past 1,000 times without ever giving it a second glance. The interior, however, was a different world entirely, humming with the quiet efficiency of advanced climate control systems and a sophisticated surveillance network that would have made most government intelligence agencies jealous. Leopoldo's head of security, a muscular and compact man with Serbian military tattoos covering his arms and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, guided her through a series of 3 heavily locked steel doors. Each one required a different biometric scan. He then left her by herself, inside a room that was furnished like a high-end corporate conference room, complete with crystal glasses and a bottle of water that cost €30. Leopoldo himself entered just 2 minutes later. He was carrying a sleek leather briefcase and wearing an expression that was completely unreadable, as if his face had been carved from marble. "Sit down," he commanded. It was not a request. It was the kind of instruction that came from a man who had never in his life been told no. LOL obeyed, taking a seat at the long glass table. Her hands remained perfectly steady on her lap, a skill she had learned from her father who had taught her that visible fear was a death sentence in the presence of powerful men. But inside, her heart was pounding like a drum in a war march. She had just shattered 8 years of carefully constructed anonymity for a man who could have her eliminated with a single, untraceable phone call. And now, she found herself completely alone with him, inside a room that she was certain was entirely soundproof, in a building that did not officially exist. Leopoldo set the briefcase on the table that separated them and clicked it open. The contents were not what she expected. There was no weapon, no threat. Inside were professionally bound financial statements and quarterly reports for his company, Fentini Holdings. They were presented in handsome navy blue portfolios, produced with a quality that was meant to project an image of absolute legitimacy. He pushed one of the thick portfolios across the glass towards her. "You have a very interesting accent for a waitress," he stated, his voice cold and analytical, dissecting her the way a surgeon examines a patient on the operating table. "It sounds like Roman nobility, old Roman nobility, the kind that has not been heard in public for decades. You were likely educated at a private lyceum, studying linguistics or perhaps economics." He paused, his eyes narrowing to razor-thin slits. And you were able to recognize a Vatican banking watermark that has not been in official use since 2008. That is a watermark that fewer than 200 people in the entire world would know how to identify. He leaned back slowly in his chair, his gaze never leaving her face, studying her with an intensity that felt like being pinned under a spotlight. So, before I make my decision about whether you are the single most valuable asset I have encountered this year, or simply a very clever assassin sent by my enemies to infiltrate my organization, I am going to give you a little test. He glanced down at his wrist, checking the time on a Patek Philippe Nautilus watch that was worth more than most people's homes, more than most people's entire lifetime earnings. You will have exactly 10 minutes to find a single flaw in those financial records. He explained that they had already been thoroughly audited by 3 different independent accounting firms, each one among the most prestigious in Europe. My own accountants, people I have employed and trusted for over 15 years, have personally assured me that they are completely immaculate. His eyes then locked onto hers, his focus as sharp and predatory as a hunting eagle that has just spotted movement in the grass far below. If you find absolutely nothing, it will prove that you are lying about your abilities, which can only mean that you are working for one of my enemies. And I think you understand what happens to people who work against me. If you do find something, you are going to tell me precisely who it was that taught you how to see it. Either way, he added with a cold smile that contained no warmth whatsoever, tonight will be a very memorable evening for both of us. LOL reached out and opened the portfolio. As she did, her father's words seemed to echo clearly in her mind, as vivid and present as if he were standing right behind her, whispering into her ear. The numbers will always confess the secrets that men will not. Her fingers began to move over the pages with a speed and precision that came from years of relentless training that had started when she was barely old enough to hold a pen. She scanned the balance sheets, the cash flow statements, and the records of subsidiary acquisitions. She was not searching for a simple, obvious case of fraud, the kind that any competent accountant could spot. She was hunting for something much more subtle, much more dangerous. She was looking for the shadow. She was searching for the ghost her father had taught her to find, the invisible fingerprint that every financial deception, no matter how brilliant, always leaves behind. It took her only 7 minutes, not 10. 7. You have a leak, LOL said, her voice barely a whisper, but a whisper that carried the force of a bomb detonation in that silent room. She turned the portfolio around to face him, her finger pointing to a specific section with absolute precision. Right here, somebody has been methodically stealing money from your organization for the last 18 months. Not large amounts, never enough to trigger any automated alert, but consistently, relentlessly, like a slow-acting poison being administered drop by drop. Leopoldo did not react. He remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the exact spot on the page that LOL's finger indicated. His expression was completely blank, as if it had been carved from a block of ice. She could feel the intensity of his focus building in the room, like the heavy electric pressure in the air just before a violent thunderstorm breaks. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. "Explain," he said, his voice low and dangerous. A voice that had ordered terrible things and would order terrible things again without hesitation. LOL drew in a steadying breath, preparing herself. This was the critical moment. This was the exact kind of situation her father had unwittingly been preparing her for her entire life. It was the moment where seeing the invisible would either be her salvation or her execution. "The company Ventura Tech Bank is not real," she started to explain, her voice gaining strength with every word. "Well, to be precise, it exists on paper. It has all the necessary regulatory filings, an official headquarters address in Lugano, and even a database of customer accounts. But the entire thing is just a shell. It is an incredibly sophisticated and well-built illusion, the most convincing one I have ever seen, but it is hollow on the inside. There is nothing there. No real customers, no real transactions, no real money. She carefully pulled the acquisition papers closer to illustrate her point. Look here at the official liquidity statements. They claim to have 300,000 clients, but the daily transaction volume is completely wrong for that number of accounts. It is off by a factor of 12. The financial ratios do not align with any known patterns of real banking activity. It is all just statistical noise, data that was specifically engineered to fool automated auditing software. A human being who knows what to look for can see through it in minutes. But they were counting on the fact that no human being would ever look. A muscle in Leopoldo's jaw twitched, the only visible sign of a rage that was building inside him like magma beneath a volcano. LOL pressed on, her confidence growing as she explained the intricate deception, the words flowing out of her with the ease of someone speaking their native language, because in a very real sense, she was. The $250 million that you were about to wire transfer would not have been used to purchase a functioning bank. Instead, the moment it arrived, it would have been instantly rerouted through Ventura Tech's primary accounts in Lugano. From there, it would have been split into thousands of smaller amounts and scattered across dozens of different correspondent banks in places like Singapore, Dubai, and the Cayman Islands. Each individual transfer would have been calculated to be just below the amount that triggers automatic reporting to financial authorities, a technique called structuring that is as old as money laundering itself. Within a mere 72 hours, your entire $250 million would have been completely vaporized, broken down into 1,000 untraceable digital fragments scattered across the globe like dust in the wind. And the man behind it all, Marchetti, or whatever his real name is, would be long gone. He would disappear so completely that it would be as if he had never existed at all. The man named Leopoldo spoke with a chilling precision, his voice like a scalpel that cut away all emotion, leaving only the cold, hard bone of calculation beneath. Lola recognized his type immediately. Marchetti was a proxy, a carefully chosen representative who almost certainly had no idea who truly pulled the strings of this operation. He was a ghost, a tool paid handsomely to present a business proposition and then completely disappear, leaving no connections behind. The real architects of this elaborate deception were the ones her father had always warned her about, a group he ominously called the Ghost Syndicate. They were a modern breed of predator, functioning not in dark alleys with weapons, but in the bright, sterile light of corporate boardrooms. They did not use firearms to seize what they wanted. Their preferred weapons were contracts, complex legal documents, and the confusing intricacies of international finance. They killed with spreadsheets. They buried their victims under mountains of paperwork. And by the time anyone realized what had happened, the money was gone and the trail was cold. Lola met his gaze directly, her own eyes steady and unflinching, and she saw the cold, hard truth reflected there. This was not their first attempt. It was a well-practiced, predatory routine. They specifically targeted organizations drowning in cash, but simultaneously being suffocated by intense government oversight. Then, they would extend what looked like a lifeline, a perfectly clean, seemingly legitimate acquisition, presenting it as the ideal way to park their money safely. And once the money was parked, they would systematically drain every last cent from the accounts before anyone could even begin to process that the financial institution they had trusted was a complete fiction, a bank that had never actually existed. It was the perfect crime, repeated over and over, growing bolder and more sophisticated with each new victim. Leopoldo suddenly pushed himself up from his chair, his movement sharp and abrupt as he walked over to the expansive window. Beyond the glass, the lights of Milan glittered across the cityscape like a vast, complex circuit board, cold and indifferent to the drama unfolding in this room. When he finally spoke again, his voice held a quality that Lola had not detected before. It was not simple anger or frustration, but a deep, dangerous calculation, the sound of a predator shifting from defense to attack. He stated, "There is a vulnerability inside my organization. Someone on the inside gave the authorization for this deal to proceed. Someone vouched for Marchetti's credibility and presented him as trustworthy. Someone I trusted with my life opened the door and invited these wolves inside. He turned away from the window to face her directly, his eyes demanding an answer with an intensity that could have shattered glass. Who was it? Without a word, Lola reached into her portfolio and retrieved another document from the stack. She slid the paper across the polished table. It was an internal authorization memorandum, and at the very bottom was a signature, clear and confident, written with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he would never be caught. That signature belonged to the second most powerful man in the entire organization, Leopoldo's own right hand, his most trusted and loyal capo, the man who had stood beside him at his mother's funeral and sworn an oath of eternal loyalty. "It is your cousin," she said, her voice a low and steady whisper that cut through the silence of the room like a razor through silk. "Matteo Fentini. He has been systematically betraying you for the last 6 months, and based on what I can see in these numbers, he has already siphoned approximately 11 million euros from your operations into accounts that I am willing to bet are controlled by the Ghost Syndicate." The scene shifted to the main conference room at Fentini Holdings, a space dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the Duomo, Milan's magnificent cathedral that had taken 6 centuries to complete. However, not one of the 6 powerful men arranged around the massive mahogany table was paying any attention to the stunning architecture. Instead, all of them were staring intently at Lola, their expressions making her feel like an unwelcome stain on a piece of priceless furniture, something that simply did not belong in their world. Leopoldo had demanded the presence of his entire inner circle, calling for an emergency meeting at the highly unusual hour of 11 o'clock on a Thursday night. These men, accustomed to power and control, men who commanded armies and moved millions with a phone call, had arrived expecting a clear explanation for the sudden crisis. What they got instead was their leader walking into the room accompanied by the woman they recognized only as a waitress from a local cafe, a woman whose hands still smelled faintly of espresso. "Gentlemen," Leopoldo announced, his tone firm and absolute, leaving no room for questions or interruptions. "This is Lola Breeze. Beginning this very moment, she will be acting as my senior investment advisor. From now on, any and all financial decisions exceeding a value of 5 million euros will require her signature of approval right alongside my own." The profound silence that descended upon the room was so thick and heavy, it felt as if it could have physically stopped a man's heart from beating. Matteo Fentini, Leopoldo's own cousin, and the very man whose signature Lola had just exposed on the fraudulent authorization papers, leaned far back in his expensive leather chair, his face a mask of theatrical disbelief that was just a fraction too perfect to be genuine. "You have to be joking, Leo. This is absurd. This is the young woman who serves you coffee at the Gilded Cage. She also single-handedly prevented me from losing $250 million of our money this evening," Leopoldo retorted, his voice dangerously calm, the kind of calm that preceded earthquakes. "That is significantly more than I can say for the performance of our current financial team." Another one of the capos, a large, heavy-set man named Salvatore, who was known for his cruelty and his complete lack of subtlety, let out a short, disrespectful laugh. "With all due respect, boss, what could her qualifications possibly be? Did she take a minor in economics while she was earning her degree and carrying dinner plates?" Lola felt that familiar, heavy sensation of being completely underestimated settle over her like a coat she had worn for 8 long years. It was the exact same feeling she had deliberately cultivated, the cloak of invisibility that had been essential to keeping her alive. But in this single moment, Leopoldo was ripping that protective cover away from her. She now faced a choice. She could either falter and sink under the weight of their scrutiny, or she could stand and demonstrate precisely why her father's enemies had once been so terrified of him that they had to kill him just to sleep at night. "My qualifications," Lola stated quietly, her distinct Roman accent slicing through their dismissive mockery like a sharpened blade, are that I am capable of seeing the things that you cannot. For example, I can see that 3 of you in this very room have been consistently routing your personal expenses through various subsidiary accounts, hiding them from oversight. I will not name you, but you know exactly who you are. I can also see that your Q3 shipping manifests clearly indicate a cargo volume that exceeds your documented fuel consumption by a staggering 18%. This discrepancy means that someone is either deliberately falsifying the weight reports or is systematically skimming product off the top before it reaches its destination. She then turned her gaze directly to Matteo, locking her eyes onto his with the precision of a sniper acquiring a target. And I can see that you personally authorized a $250 million acquisition of a bank that does not exist, which makes you either catastrophically incompetent at your job or, far more likely, a traitor to this family. And I would stake my life on the latter. The atmosphere in the room instantly turned rigid, every man frozen in place like statues in a museum of fear. All the color drained from Matteo's face, leaving him pale and visibly shaken for the first time in anyone's memory. Leopoldo did not allow even a hint of a smile to cross his lips, but something cold and glacial settled deep within his expression, a silent promise of retribution that was more terrifying than any spoken threat. Lola has my complete and total confidence. If anyone here has an issue with that, you are free to submit your resignation to me immediately. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink into the silence like stones dropped into deep water. Or, he added, we can choose to discuss the matter in a much more private and permanent setting. Not a single person spoke. Not a single person dared to move. Not a single person even breathed. Good, Leopoldo said with finality. Now, let us begin discussing exactly how we are going to systematically dismantle the people who just tried to destroy us. And gentlemen, I promise you, by the time we are finished, they will wish they had never heard the name Fiorentini. That evening, the Palazzo della Permanente was glittering like an open jewelry box, overflowing with the highest echelons of Milan's society, all of them pretending that their vast fortunes were completely legitimate. The annual Financial Innovation Gala was a magnet for influential bankers, powerful diplomats, and the kind of immense wealth that could shift entire markets with just a few quiet phone calls. The champagne alone cost more than most people's annual salary. Lola stood beside a tall marble column, wearing an elegant black Valentino gown that Leopoldo's associates had delivered to her apartment earlier that morning, in a box that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She felt like a complete imposter, an outsider surrounded by women who had been born into this world of privilege, a world she had only ever been able to study from the confines of her father's office, looking in through a window she was never supposed to open. However, she had not come here tonight to blend in with the crowd. She had come to hunt. Leopoldo moved through the opulent ballroom with a practiced and effortless charm, confidently shaking hands with powerful politicians and influential fund managers, while his personal security detail maintained a subtle but unbreakable perimeter around him. Lola deliberately drifted away from the main crowd and toward the champagne terrace. There, small groups of men dressed in expensive bespoke suits were discussing market trends and corporate mergers, their voices loosened and lubricated by expensive moët. Her father had always taught her that powerful men reveal their deepest secrets in 3 distinct languages. First, there is what they say in public forums. Second is what they admit in private conversations. And third, and most important, is what they say when they believe that no one of any consequence is listening. And that was the key. They never considered a young woman in a beautiful dress to be a person of any consequence. That was their fatal mistake. She strategically positioned herself near a small cluster of Swiss bankers, expertly playing the role of decorative arm candy who was completely absorbed in her phone. They were conversing in Romansh, a dialect so incredibly rare that fewer than 60,000 people in the entire world still speak it. The vast majority of Italians would not even recognize it as a spoken language. But Lola's father, Giacomo Brise, had frequently worked with Vatican financiers who used Romansh for that very reason. It rendered their conversations effectively invisible to any outsiders. He had taught her the language when she was 11 years old, and she had thought at the time that it was the most useless thing he had ever made her learn. She was wrong. It was about to save an empire. "The Fentini deal has collapsed," one of the men said, his tone conveying a sense of disappointment, but not genuine surprise. "Marchetti officially called the whole thing off this afternoon. He said that the target got spooked at the last minute." "That is unfortunate," another banker replied calmly, taking a sip from his glass. "That makes the third family we have lost this quarter alone. Someone is educating them, showing them what to look for." A third voice, belonging to an older, more commanding man, whose watch alone was worth €500,000, interjected. "It does not matter in the long run. The syndicate already has 6 other acquisitions currently in motion. The Costas down in Napoli, the Brandies up in Torino. We will more than recover our losses by the spring." He took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne. Besides, Fentini was always considered a significant risk. "He is too intelligent, far too disciplined. The desperate ones are always so much easier to manipulate." Lola felt her pulse begin to accelerate, but she kept her face perfectly composed, her eyes locked on her phone screen where she was pretending to scroll through social media. She had just obtained confirmation that the Ghost Syndicate was not just a single, isolated operation. It was a methodical and systematic campaign that was actively targeting multiple powerful crime families all across Italy, and they were all operating under the dangerous assumption that their victims were either too proud or too afraid to ever compare notes with each other. They were completely blind to the silent war being waged with stock prices and currency trades, a battlefield of financial warfare they did not even know existed. Across the opulent terrace, amidst the low hum of powerful conversations, Lola made contact. Her eyes met Leopoldo's, and she gave him the most subtle inclination of her head, a gesture so small it was almost invisible. He understood instantly. Without hesitation, he excused himself from a delicate discussion with a prominent parliament member, his movement across the marble floor deliberate, a predator closing in with focused intent. As he drew near, his presence a shield against the oblivious crowd, Lola leaned in and spoke in a hushed, urgent tone. "I need a pen and something to write on, right now." Her voice was tight with the gravity of her discovery. "I just overheard them speaking in Romansh, Leopoldo. They did not know I could understand every word. They named their next 6 targets, 6 more families they plan to destroy, and they are planning to do it by spring." The look that crossed Leopoldo's face in that moment was something she would never forget. It was not fear. It was not even anger. It was the expression of a man who had just been handed the keys to his enemy's kingdom. For the next 3 days, Lola barely slept. She occupied a converted office within the imposing Fentini Holdings Tower, a space she had transformed into her personal command center. The room was a chaotic collage of papers and screens, a fortress built from documents that told a horrifying story of systematic betrayal. This treachery was not written in blood, but in the cold, hard numbers of spreadsheets and the silent, irreversible paths of wire transfers. Leopoldo had placed his complete trust in her, granting her unconditional access to the company's deepest secrets. He unlocked everything. A full decade of private internal communications, an ocean of confidential banking records, and meticulously detailed histories of every acquisition became hers to command. Lola was hunting for a single, elusive thread, a ghost-like connection that would definitively link the powerful Matteo Fentini to the shadowy ghost syndicate orchestrating the chaos. After 4 days and nights of relentless searching, surviving on nothing but black coffee and raw determination, she finally found it. The clue was hidden deep within the file metadata, a digital footprint that 99% of people would never even know was there, buried in a place where only someone trained by Giacomo Breeze would ever think to look. The pattern began with the first glaring inconsistency, an anomaly that screamed from the email timestamps. Matteo had opened a critical message that originated from a heavily encrypted, untraceable address precisely 48 hours before the first company collapsed, before the very first time he had mentioned the Ventura acquisition proposal to Leopoldo. The content of the message itself had been thoroughly deleted, but the server logs still held a record of it. The logs showed that it had contained an attachment, a PDF file cryptically labeled Investment Opportunity Confidential. Lola immediately cross-referenced that specific date with Matteo's personal calendar. She found that he had taken an unscheduled personal trip to Lugano that same weekend. There were no business meetings listed on his schedule, and no family events were planned. It was simply 2 full days spent in Switzerland with no documented reason or purpose, a suspicious void that any investigator worth their salt would have flagged immediately. Then, after hours of painstaking searching, following a trail so faint that it was almost invisible, she finally found the hidden bank account. It was cleverly concealed behind a Panamanian shell corporation, buried 3 layers deep in a web of legal entities that had been specifically designed to be impenetrable. But Lola had learned her craft from a true master of the art. Her father always used to say that money moves exactly like water. It never fails to leave traces behind. It leaves condensation on a glass, and it causes erosion in stone. No matter how carefully you try to hide its path, if you know where to look, you will find the marks it left behind. She painstakingly followed the faint trail of evaporation backward, tracing the funds through a series of correspondent banks until she finally uncovered the source. It was a single transfer of $2 million into Matteo's shell company, dated just 1 week after his mysterious trip to Lugano. But the detail that made her blood run cold was not the payment itself. It was the memo line, a small piece of text visible only when looking at the raw transaction data that most banking systems automatically filter out. It read, "Consultation fee, board seat pending successful acquisition." Matteo had not simply been bribed to authorize the fraudulent deal and look the other way. He had been promised a senior position within the Ghost Syndicate itself. The plan was for him to escape the Fantini Empire just before it was engineered to collapse, allowing him to take a comfortable seat at the very table of the organization that was systematically working to destroy families just like his own across the country. He was willing to watch his own blood burn for a seat at a table built on the ashes of others. Lola printed out all of the damning evidence, organized it into a file that was as precise and devastating as a guided missile, and went to find Leopoldo. She found him in his private office, standing completely still by the window, exuding the kind of dangerous quiet that always preceded intense violence. "It is much worse than we initially thought," she said simply, placing the stack of documents firmly on his polished desk. Matteo was not just some useful idiot they manipulated. He was a willing and active participant in this betrayal. They offered him a full partnership and a guaranteed annual income of 10 million euros. He was fully prepared to watch your entire family burn to the ground and then profit from the ashes that remained. He was going to attend your funeral and then collect his bonus. Leopoldo picked up the printed bank transfer record, his face a completely unreadable mask that had been perfected over decades of operating in a world where showing emotion could get you killed. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy, carrying the unmistakable weight of a death sentence. "Where is he right now? Your security team has tracked him to a private villa in Como. He is in the process of packing his belongings. It appears he knows that the deal has failed, and he is preparing to flee the country. He has a private jet booked for tomorrow morning to Buenos Aires." Leopoldo reached for his phone on the desk. Not anymore. Not anymore. Those 2 simple words had just signed a man's death warrant. Matteo had made the choice to betray his own blood. And now the consequences of that choice were about to explode with unimaginable force. If your heart is racing right now, then you truly understand the gravity of what is at stake. This conflict is no longer just about money. It is now about family, about blood loyalty, and about the ultimate price of treachery. The next few minutes are going to determine whether 250 million euros disappears into the ether forever, or if Lola can somehow manage to achieve the impossible. Make certain that you are subscribed, because what is about to happen next is a desperate, high-stakes race against the clock that is guaranteed to leave you completely breathless. The Ghost Syndicate is confident that they have already won, but they are about to receive a harsh lesson on why you should never, ever underestimate the accountant's daughter. The critical phone call came in at 4 o'clock in the morning. Lola was still wide awake in her apartment, meticulously analyzing the complex network of the Ghost Syndicate, her eyes burning from exhaustion, but her mind as sharp as a blade. LOL's world stopped when Leopoldo's name ignited her phone's screen. The moment she answered, his voice cut through the silence, sharp and without ceremony. Matteo ran, he said, the two words landing like stones dropped into still water. He explained with brutal efficiency how his cousin had betrayed them all one final time. From some hidden location, Matteo had initiated the transfer from Ventura Tech. He did it remotely, a final cowardly act of destruction before anyone could get to him. Now, $250 million was bleeding out of the company account. That enormous sum was actively being processed, a ghost moving through the global financial machine at the speed of light. Leopoldo's voice was a steel wire of tension. "We have 90 minutes, he stated. 90 minutes before the money sliced through a network of correspondent banks and vanished into an untraceable void forever. Before he finished speaking, LOL was already a blur of motion, throwing on clothes in the dark. "Where are you?" she demanded, her mind already racing ahead, calculating routes and probabilities and points of failure. His answer came back instantly. Heading to Ventura Tech's Milan Operations Center, he confirmed what she suspected. It is a complete front, but they have to maintain physical servers to look authentic for regulatory inspections. If we can get inside their system directly, we can pull the money back. The meaning was clear. Only power could protect what was theirs. And you have to hear how they did it. Leopoldo's voice was a study in controlled urgency, a surgeon's command in the middle of a life-or-death crisis. "I need you there, LOL. My people know how to break down doors and handle physical threats, but you know how to break into banks. You know how to read the language that these machines speak. We each have our part to play, and yours is the part that will determine whether we survive or we fall." Just 20 minutes later, she was sinking into the leather seats in the back of Leopoldo's armored Mercedes, a vehicle that weighed more than most trucks due to its military-grade armor plating. The city of Milan was a dark, sleeping giant as they tore through its empty streets at speeds that would have resulted in immediate arrest under any normal circumstances. The driver pushed the powerful engine to its absolute limits, moving at speeds that defied the law and turned the scattered streetlights into long, shimmering golden streaks that painted the windows like brushstrokes in an impressionist painting. Their destination was the Ventura Tech Building, an imposing glass tower standing silent and dark in the prestigious Porta Nuova district. It was a monument of modern architecture, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces, designed for complete corporate anonymity. It was the perfect place to hide a crime of this magnitude, right out in the open, shielded by its own blandness and legitimacy, just another glass tower among dozens. Inside that car, moving like a bullet through the sleeping city, LOL felt a familiar coldness settle over her, the feeling of the hunt beginning. She was completely isolated, the only person alive with the skill to navigate the digital maze ahead. Her father had prepared her for this moment. He just never imagined it would cost him his life. By the time their car slid to a silent stop before the glass tower, Leopoldo's trusted team had already done their brutal, efficient work. They had methodically dismantled the building's external security systems and breached the grand lobby, leaving a path open that was littered with disabled cameras and unconscious security guards. The real target, the server room, was located on the 12th floor. It was a climate-controlled vault, a sterile white room that hummed with the constant low thrum of expensive hardware. The temperature was kept at a precise 16 degrees Celsius, cold enough that LOL could see her own breath. This was the heart of the elaborate lie, the physical machinery that maintained a global fraud worth billions. LOL wasted no time, immediately taking a seat at the main terminal. Beside her, Leopoldo's top technical specialist, a quiet and intense man named Costa, who was a former Italian intelligence officer with 20 years of experience, worked to bypass the system's authentication protocols. After a few tense moments that felt like hours, a new screen blinked to life. "We are in," Costa announced, stepping back to give her space. He motioned to the screen filled with incomprehensible code. "But I have no idea what I am looking at. This is not a standard banking architecture. It is something else entirely. Something I have never encountered in 2 decades of intelligence work." The air was cold, the hum of the servers a constant reminder of the digital battle ahead, and the weight of their mission settled entirely on LOL's shoulders. What Costa saw as chaos, LOL saw as a language she knew intimately, as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Her fingers began to move across the keyboard with a trained, fluid precision that was mesmerizing to watch. It was a skill her father had forced her to learn. When she was only 13 years old, he had made her practice for hours on dummy financial systems, just like this one, sitting at his desk until her fingers ached and her eyes blurred. He taught her a fundamental truth, that all financial institutions, no matter how powerful or sophisticated, were just databases with pretensions of grandeur. Underneath all the security protocols and encryption layers, they were just numbers in boxes, and numbers had never been able to hide from a breeze. With that lesson burned into her mind, she navigated through the complex layers of encryption. She peeled them back one by one, like the layers of an onion, until she finally broke through to the core system. There it was, the transaction queue. It was a simple list of pending transfers, and near the top, she saw the glaring entry for Leopoldo's $250 million. A digital timer next to the entry showed it was scheduled to fragment into thousands of smaller pieces and disperse across the globe in exactly 37 minutes. The clock was ticking. She had only 37 minutes left before it was gone for good, scattered to the 4 corners of the earth like seeds in a hurricane. "I need administrative access to stop this," LOL announced, her voice calm despite the immense pressure bearing down on her, a calmness that amazed even herself. "The kill switch they built requires dual authentication. It needs both a password and a biometric scan to activate." This was the final, formidable wall protecting the theft, a wall that had been specifically designed to be unbreakable. "Can you bypass it?" Leopoldo asked from behind her, his tone low and dangerous, the tone of a man who was not accustomed to hearing the word impossible. Instead of answering, LOL pulled up the system's user directory, her eyes scanning the list of names with high-level permissions. Her pulse suddenly kicked, accelerating in her chest as she recognized a familiar name in the administrative access list. A cold smile touched her lips, the first smile she had allowed herself in days. "I do not have to bypass it," she said, a new confidence in her voice. "I can use Matteo's own credentials. He is listed right here as an authorized signatory." The sheer arrogance of the traitor was breathtaking. In his rush to flee, in his absolute confidence that no one could ever reach this system, he had left himself a key to the kingdom he was trying to rob. She began typing rapidly, her father's lessons from so long ago flowing through her, translating from distant memory into pure muscle memory, as her fingers flew across the keys. The system immediately accepted Matteo's username. A new window popped up. It demanded his fingerprint to complete the login. The final lock was biological. Without a word, Leopoldo pulled out his phone and made a single chilling call. His instructions were terrifyingly simple, delivered in a voice that was as cold and flat as a frozen lake. "Bring me Mateo's right hand." An agonizing 18 minutes later, minutes that felt like years, Mateo was dragged into the server room, held tightly between two of Leopoldo's formidable security men. He was in restraints, his designer suit torn and dirty, his face a mask of pure terror that no amount of bravado could conceal. He had been found hiding in the trunk of a car at the Como border crossing, trying to flee to Switzerland with 2 suitcases of cash and a one-way ticket to Argentina. His right hand was trembling uncontrollably as the security chief grabbed it and pressed his index finger firmly against the smooth surface of the biometric scanner. The system registered the print, and a soft electronic chime echoed in the silent room, a sound as quiet and as devastating as a judge's gavel. With that simple sound, LOL was granted access. She was inside the administrative core of Ventura Tech's entire infrastructure. This was the beating heart of a massive, sophisticated fraud, a criminal enterprise that had secretly destroyed families and ruined lives all across Europe, and now she held the power to destroy it with a few keystrokes. Her first action was to deliver justice. She navigated to the kill switch and canceled the pending transaction. She watched on the screen as the $250 million froze in digital suspension, hanging for a moment in the void before its routing instructions reversed, sending it flowing back to the primary account of Fiorentini Holdings, like blood returning to a heart. Leopoldo stood directly behind her, a silent, imposing presence offering a strange kind of comfort, while Costa kept his eyes glued to the security feeds, watching for any sign that the Ghost Syndicate had detected their intrusion into its network. But LOL was not finished. Simply defending the money was not enough. Her father used to tell her that defense was only a temporary solution, a way to survive the present moment. "Defense keeps you alive today," he would say, "but only a devastating counterattack keeps you alive tomorrow." Lasting safety, he had taught her, was only created by ensuring that your enemy could never attack again. She had stopped the bleeding, and now it was time to kill the beast that had bitten them, permanently. She pushed deeper into Ventura Tech's complex digital architecture, moving past the theatrical front-end system that was designed to fool auditors and regulators. She slipped into the shadow ledgers, the hidden space where the real money lived and moved, a secret world within a world. And what she discovered there made her breath catch in her throat and her hands freeze above the keyboard for 3 full seconds. The Ghost Syndicate had not just created one fake bank. They had created 17 of them. 17. Each one was a perfectly crafted illusion, a shell corporation with a sophisticated digital front designed to drain a different wealthy target. The scale of the deception was staggering, almost incomprehensible. She found the master ledger, and the numbers were almost unbelievable. The combined deposits stolen from their victims over the past 3 years totaled nearly 2 billion euros. 2 billion. All of it had been pooled into a single master account in the Seychelles, a massive hoard of stolen wealth waiting to be distributed to the syndicate's hidden partners. The system had failed on every level. Every regulator, every auditor, every expert, every safeguard. All of them had been completely defeated by the sheer sophistication of the lie. "How much time do we have?" LOL asked Costa, her eyes never leaving the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard like a pianist preparing for the most important performance of her career. He quickly checked his watch, his face grim. "Maybe 20 minutes, he replied. 20 minutes at most before their overnight monitoring systems will flag this intrusion and lock us out permanently." She absorbed the information. 20 minutes. 20 minutes to dismantle a criminal empire that had taken years to build. 20 minutes to deliver justice for every family they had destroyed. LOL's fingers moved with the surgical precision of a master craftsman. She began to write a new routing protocol, a complex piece of code designed to perform a single, audacious task. Her plan was not just to steal the money back, but to completely repurpose it. She was going to redirect every single euro sitting in the syndicate's master account. The new destination was not a private account, but the Fiorentini Foundation, Leopoldo's legitimate charitable organization that funded hospitals and schools all across northern Italy. The money, she decided, would be cleaned through an act of massive, forced philanthropy. It would be transformed from stolen assets into a public good, making it impossible for the syndicate to ever reclaim it without publicly admitting to the theft of 2 billion euros. It was the most elegant act of financial destruction she could imagine. She locked in the final line of code and executed the transfer protocol. Immediately, she watched as 2 billion euros began moving across international banking networks. It was like watching the flow of blood in a body suddenly change direction, a massive, silent reversal of fortune that would be felt across continents. On her screen, she pulled up a real-time view of the syndicate's master account balance. The number, once astronomically high, began to plummet, falling rapidly toward zero as the funds were rerouted to do good in the world. The wealth was being returned to the people, just not the people who originally owned it. It was a higher form of justice, the kind that her father had always dreamed of, but never lived to see. The balance hit zero. "It is done," LOL said quietly, the words hanging in the cold air of the server room like a prayer answered after years of silence. "They are bankrupt. Every single account, every single shell company, every single cent gone." She explained the final, beautiful twist, and even Leopoldo's hardened eyes widened slightly. Every family they targeted will receive compensation through the Foundation's distribution network. The Ghost Syndicate just paid to fund its own extinction. They built an empire of theft, and I just turned it into the largest charitable donation in Italian history. In that moment of victory, Leopoldo placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. It was the first time he had ever touched her with something that felt like genuine respect rather than cold calculation. "Your father," he said, his voice low and thick with an emotion he rarely allowed anyone to see, "would be proud." True power had protected them. The silence of the victims had enabled unimaginable harm, and justice in the end had come from the most imperfect of people, from a waitress who earned €9 an hour, from an orphan who had been running from her own gift for 8 years. It was a profound and irreversible victory. LOL stared at the screen, at the numbers that represented so much more than money. They represented lives saved, empires protected, and a brutal kind of justice delivered in the only language that predators like the Syndicate could ever understand: total annihilation. "He taught me how to find ghosts," she said, her voice barely a whisper, tears forming in her eyes for the first time since she was 16 years old. She turned her head to look up at Leopoldo. "You taught me how to kill them." 3 weeks after the complete financial collapse of the Ghost Syndicate, LOL received a formal, engraved invitation, delivered by a man in a black suit who arrived in a Rolls-Royce. It was for dinner at Leopoldo's private estate, nestled in the beautiful Brianza Hills just north of Milan. The villa was a masterpiece of Renaissance architecture that had been seamlessly wrapped around a core of modern security. It was the kind of magnificent property that had survived for centuries by constantly adapting to the threats of each new age, a perfect reflection of its owner. The villa was a stunning fusion of eras, where classic Renaissance architecture was fortified with the most advanced modern security systems money could buy. It was the type of magnificent property that had watched centuries pass, surviving because it had mastered the art of adapting to every new and dangerous age. Lola arrived just as the sun was setting, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple so vivid they looked like they had been applied by the hand of God himself. She was still wearing the exquisite Valentino gown she had worn at the gala. It was a painful reminder of her old life, but it was also the only item of clothing she owned that would not look out of place in a world of such immense power and wealth. Leopoldo was waiting for her in a grand library that contained over 12,000 books, the air thick with the rich, comforting scents of aged leather and the unmistakable aroma of old money. In his hands he held two delicate crystal glasses filled with a deep red Brunello from 1997, a bottle worth €3,000. And in that moment, for the very first time since their paths had crossed, his expression was not one of cold calculation or strategic assessment. He looked unguarded. He looked, for a fleeting second, almost completely human. "The foundation distributed its first round of payments yesterday," he said, handing her a glass of the rich wine. His voice was filled with a satisfaction he did not try to hide. 47 families across Italy received full compensation for financial losses they did not even know they had suffered yet. They were saved before they even knew they were in danger. Widows who were about to lose their homes woke up to find their mortgages paid. Small business owners who were on the verge of bankruptcy discovered that their debts had been mysteriously cleared. Families that had been systematically robbed for years received every cent back, with interest. He took a slow sip from his own glass. "The financial press is calling it the largest single act of organized philanthropy in modern Italian history." He paused, letting the irony hang in the air between them, like the last note of a symphony. "They have absolutely no idea that this grand gesture was funded entirely by the very people who were trying to destroy us." LOL took a sip of the wine. It was smooth and complex. It tasted like velvet and violence, a perfect summary of their shared victory. "Matteo?" she asked, the name feeling like a distant echo from another lifetime, from a world that no longer existed. Leopoldo's face hardened almost imperceptibly. "He is in a monastery in Calabria," he answered coolly. "He is alive, which is far more mercy than he deserved, but he will spend the rest of his days praying for a forgiveness that he will never receive from me. His phone has been confiscated, his accounts are frozen, he owns nothing, he is nothing, and every morning when he wakes up, he will remember that he had everything, and he threw it all away for a seat at a table that no longer exists." Leopoldo carefully set down his glass on a nearby table, the sound echoing slightly in the quiet room. "But I did not invite you here tonight to discuss my treacherous cousin." He walked over to his enormous antique desk, a desk that had once belonged to a Medici prince, and retrieved a document. It was a single page of heavy cream-colored paper bearing the official Fiorentini Holdings letterhead and embossed with a gold seal. He placed it on the desk in front of her, and next to it, he laid a beautiful fountain pen, one that looked startlingly similar to her father's Mont Blanc, so similar that for a moment she could not breathe. She picked up the document. The words were simple and direct. Chief Financial Strategist. She read the titles aloud, tasting the power in them like wine on her tongue. Full signing authority on all corporate transactions. A permanent seat on the executive board. An equity stake in the holding company. A guaranteed annual salary of €2 million, with performance bonuses tied to the growth of the legitimate portfolio. It was an offer beyond anything she could have imagined, beyond anything her father could have imagined. "You saved my empire, LOL," Leopoldo said, his voice direct and sincere in a way that she sensed was extremely rare for him. "You did not just save my money, you saved my family's legacy. You saved 47 families who never even knew they were in danger. And you destroyed an organization that had been terrorizing the financial world for years. Now I am asking you to help me build a new one, a better one." He explained this was not just about protection from thieves anymore. This was about expansion, about gaining legitimacy, about undertaking the kind of grand transformation that takes generations to achieve. His eyes locked onto hers, their intensity holding her in place. "I need someone who sees the patterns that others cannot. Someone who understands the world as it is, not as it pretends to be. I need someone whose eyes can see ghosts. And there is only one person in the world who has those eyes." He saw something in her that others could not, a rare ability to see the patterns hidden beneath the surface. He recognized she was someone who had inherited a legacy of pure brilliance, not just a fortune built by others. Lola reached for the pen, feeling the surprising and significant weight of it in her hand. The pen felt warm, as if it had been waiting for her. This felt different from everything that had come before. Her father was gone because he had uncovered money that was designed to remain hidden forever, a discovery that cost him his life. But as she stood there, in a library that smelled of old books and new beginnings, she had a revelation that struck her with the force of lightning. Perhaps the true lesson from his tragedy was not to retreat from her own extraordinary gift. Perhaps the lesson was not that seeing ghosts was dangerous, but that seeing ghosts alone was what got you killed. Maybe the lesson was to be far more careful about who she chose to use it for. She would align herself with strength, with power, with someone who could protect her gift while she used it to change the world. She signed her full name, pledging her allegiance to the new family she had deliberately chosen, a family forged in crisis, baptized in betrayal, and bound by something far stronger than blood. And with that single, powerful stroke of the pen, Lola sealed her fate. She was no longer a victim of her past, but the architect of her future, marking the true beginning of an absolutely incredible journey. The accountant's daughter had become the most powerful woman in Milan, and the Ghost Syndicate was just the first empire she would bring to its knees. If you love this incredible story of justice and revenge as much as I do, please show your support and hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe for more tales of brilliance, payback, and hard-won redemption. It is so important to turn on your notifications so you never miss a single episode of our journey into these incredible stories. And now I have to ask you, what was your absolute favorite moment in this entire saga? Was it the initial shock when she spotted the fraud hidden in plain sight? Was it the terrifying moment when Leopoldo said, "Bring me Matteo's right hand"? Was it the high-stakes tension of the server room heist as the clock counted down to zero? Or was it this final, incredible transformation where a waitress earning €9 an hour claimed a seat at the most powerful table in Italy? Please comment below and let me know. Let's discuss every twist and turn of this amazing story. Your engagement and your passion mean everything to this channel. I truly want to thank you for being here and sharing this experience with me. I will see you in the next story. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and lasting value to our audience. Thank you for trusting us with your time.